Before we get started with today's interview, just a quick reminder, click the thumbs up, make sure you subscribe and ding the bell so that you don't miss any of the great interviews that we have coming up. Now, on to today's interview. So welcome back, everybody. It is my great pleasure today to speak with composer Tom Gerou. Tom, thank you so much for taking time to join us today.
My pleasure, Sam. It's always nice to be able to talk about music.
What role do restrictions play when you are composing?
Oh, I find almost composing in a box. I actually enjoy that very much. And I do that to myself if I'm doing, let's say I'm doing a set of 7 pieces. I want each one to be slightly different. There may be, I can only write in 4/4, 3/4, quarter notes, half notes, whole notes. How can I make that work differently from piece to piece to piece? I like having that restriction because there's a certain point when you spend the time and the hours working that it sort of clicks on a different level and you don't know how to get there instantly. But when you arrive there, you go, why didn't I ever see this? It's a 5-finger pattern, but now I can do something different. And perhaps it's just that one accidental you introduce into your harmonic language. And if I'm usually with beginning pieces, I add an accompaniment because that fills it out. That makes the student sound so good. But the harmony implied in the melodic material that the student's playing then gets tied into more harmonic material in the accompaniment. And it's all very subtle and very scaled back and trimmed and edited and everything. But it is those magical moments where you can do something just slightly different, a challenge for the student, but not too much.
Absolutely. And you touched on something a moment ago that I noticed as I've played and loved your compositions for years and years. And as I played through all of your works that are on the Federation Festival list this time around, I noticed that while they're really varied and they have many different styles and they're going to appeal to many different students, they all have a certain thread that runs through them that makes them uniquely yours. What are the things that you did to kind of help find who you are as a composer and to find your sound, the things that makes your pieces uniquely yours?
I think the longer I write, the more I decide on what the rhythmic material is, the harmonic material, and the melodic material. And I keep it very, very tight. I see composition as 2 stages. You get an idea, you get to the end of the piece. However, you can get to the end of the piece. That's the quick part. The hard part is taking another week or another 2 weeks and constantly looking at it and taking out things that don't belong there, that are disruptive to the material that you're working with. It's like a cook. You don't put marshmallows in Italian food, even though you love marshmallows. You just don't. You keep it to certain ingredients. And I'm an awful cook, by the way. But if were I a cook, I'd be very careful. But I think of those terms, and it's the editing after I get the ideas down. And luckily with technology, one of the encouraging and supportive things is I keep every single version. So when I've changed a fair amount of, 3-4 measures, I save that and I move on. Every once in a while, I find out that the impulsive composition ideas, there was some idea I wanted to go back and take it again because now I've almost smoothed it out too much and I need to bring back some of that spontaneity. So I can go back and forth. I don't write at the piano anymore because I feel that the compositions are stronger away. And I'm always surprised when I do play through the piece, especially if I have to perform it, I have to learn it like everybody else. I may change a few fingerings. I may modify a few dynamics, but the piece is always what I thought it was. But I look at the rhythmic flow, and I think the time I spend most on any piece is how is the rhythm and the phrasing shaping each section and pushing it to the next section. You'll notice even in the easiest of pieces, it goes somewhere, and I'm very careful to have some sort of surprise, whether it's harmonic or melodic, and those aren't necessarily overtly intentional. They're what my mind and what my ear wants to hear there. I don't want to have a nice, perfect cadence. I want something different, but I don't want it to be outside of what I'm working on. So I don't know what it is until the piece says I'm done. So some pieces write themselves very quickly. Some I labor. Sometimes I put them away, and those pieces from 4 years ago, I'm able to just pull it out and finish the piece. I don't know why I was snagged on it. I finish it, and it becomes perhaps one of my better pieces.
Interesting. And I think that your attention to detail with editing and revising and rethinking really shows through in all of your pieces. They are just beautiful and beautifully laid out on the page, as we'll talk about a little bit later. Let me ask you this. Do you teach composition?
Yes, it's sort of an occasional thing. When the student will take lessons for a certain amount of time, and then they kind of move on to whether they're taking it to help them through a class, or whether they're feeling that they need some momentary instruction on something. In those composition lessons, we truly try to understand universal concepts much more than digging into one style. It doesn't matter what anyone writes in any style. What is the shape of the piece? What is the intent of that? What elements are we going to keep, and which ones are we pulling out of a random, pile of ideas? And it's that shaping and that thinking. Listening to music, I'll listen to their viewpoint of what is in the music from their perspective, and then I'll offer my perspective in the overall thing. And when I'm hearing what they're going, and it may be a dissonant piece, it may be a romantic piece, but there are universal keys, I think, to successful music. When it sits down and it's a bunch of notes on a page, and they want a 20-page piece, regardless, then I challenge them back to trim it and to shape it. What is the point of the piece? Is the audience going to pick it up? Even subconsciously, they don't have to consciously pick it up, but subconsciously, they should walk away from the experience, understanding the piece.
Excellent. And what advice would you give young composers who are aspiring and hope to kind of achieve some of the successes that you've achieved?
I think, going back to your question about the limitations in writing, I think that is the best skill ever. If someone's teaching, and most people who are composing will be teaching, I think that they should do the assignments for their students. Try to write the pieces that will be useful in the students learning them, because it's that restriction that makes you think about whatever you're writing. And then you move on, you higher levels of composition stuff. But without those restrictions, it's sort of like the years that I was in a ballet accompanist. There's certain meters, certain tempi that a ballet bar uses, for instance, and uh, after you play 8 hours a day, 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you start improvising to fill in the repertoire, you try to figure out how you can fit it in the 8-bar phrases, how you can make it interesting, how you can shape a piece instantly in that environment. With that limit, you have to keep the tempo. You have to have those very locked in phrases. You have to keep, it very clear, the pulse clear. And those challenges, then when I went to educational music, it's still the same thing. They can only do so much. So if I move a hand, a finger out of a certain area, I need to think about, is there too much going on for that student to successfully do that? So it's all these kind of thinking. Also, as the older I get, the more I realize, and I think I almost understand Monet and various painters more, because I will look at a piece at night or in the afternoon or in the morning, 3 days later, a week later, and it all looks different to me. And it solves a lot of problems depending on my energy level and creativity level at different times. So I may be tired, and I'll just do a quick recording of a piece, and I'll listen to it. And maybe as I'm just kind of relaxing at night, I'll hear some flow problem that I wouldn't have heard in the morning because I'm on caffeine, you know. And that's sort of an interesting thing. And it's also, I've tied that into editing as well. I don't see what needs to be seen at the same time every day. So I'll start looking at one thing first thing in the morning, and maybe that'll be the last thing I look at on another day. And it helps me kind of catch things and see things differently.
That's a great way to put it. And I love how you break up your times where you're creative, knowing that perhaps the perspective that a different moment in time is going to bring greater clarity to that. So that's really cool. How do you avoid some of those pitfalls, which are so common for composers, where they start a million things and finish nothing, or have trouble getting past that blank page syndrome, where it feels like, I don't know how to get started?
There's a first and foremost is a deadline. You know, you need to have a deadline. And then you also need to make sure you just continue, even if you don't feel like the creativity is flowing. I find when I'm doing all the other tasks life throws at you, and I don't get to compose for a week or 2 weeks, I find it incredibly difficult to start again. And I'm sitting there for 2 days or 3 days. I'm a charlatan. I've never written a piece of music. How did I ever pull this off all these years? And then, like the third day or the fourth day, bam, all those ideas I was trying to come up with start flowing. And you get the layers of thought with, yeah, you know, I'm probably the snarkiest when I'm composing because I have this big tier of ideas that I'm mulling around in. If the dog barks and there's a messenger at the mailbox, I'm just like, oh no, they're all falling down. But it is that the mind starts exercising and it gets into that mode and it flows. Now, if I continue that flow and I stay at composition day after day, I can start a piece, and if I finish it, I have to start another piece so that I can jump in the middle of that piece or that section or that measure or whatever it may be, and I can continue from day to day. I could compose every single day of the year. It's when I stop, it's hard to get the engine back going. But it is little tricks that I've learned for myself to call the muse. You know, I'm calling them to help me out, and I work on that. If I'm stuck in a section of a piece, I'll then start working on another section. Maybe I don't have any ideas for that other section, but I'll think: do I want a contrasting? Do I want it similar? What do I want to do with a contrasting? And I'll start working on that as if it's another piece. Then I combine the ideas as I'm in the editing process. This becomes part of this and this and this, all just kind of melts. But that is why I like to compose. It's architecture. Part of the reason I stick with piano music, quite honestly, is because I know I can hear it eventually. I could play it. I could hear a lot of students play it. Any ensemble pieces I've written or an orchestral piece or something, I hear it once and I'll never hear it again. I just don't have that opportunity. It's a whole different world to be connected to larger ensembles or, you know, a string quartets that would play a number of your pieces and perform them. But in the piano world, I hear my music. I like the world. Plus, I have an affinity for the piano that is very special to me. So,
Thank you so much, Tom.
thank you, Sam. My pleasure.